Well, it's good to be here this morning, and I've just enjoyed already the messages that we have received, so applicable to our lives. And I've been thinking about, everybody is asking, what in the world is the Lord doing? I believe the Lord's doing what He's always done. He's speaking to His people, giving them a warning in relations to the things that are to soon come upon us. Revelation speaks of the things which that thou hast seen, and the things which are, and the things which shall be hereafter. And I'm supposed to give my testimony. Let me read just verse 15 of chapter number 6. I think the tragedy that we've been seeing on the news this week is the greatest that history has ever known, except the flood. The great general that went over there to survey things, he looked upon that as he went out in the helicopter, him and Governor Bush from Florida, and he talked about all the wars he'd been in and the terrible things that he has saw on the battlefield. But he said, this surpasses anything I have ever saw in my life. General Colin Powell. Now, he saw a lot of death and destruction. But what we have saw this week as they took it from the air, it reminded me of a swamp filled with broken, rotten logs. And it was bodies that all over everywhere they're trying to pick up yet. Now, this is just a picture of what's going to happen during the tribulation period. Now, when God sent the flood, I believe that when the flood came, they were scratching at the ark and wanting in, but there was a time that God closed the door. And we see the terrible destruction of lives in the past week, and I believe the Lord's saying, wake up, church. But the thing that bothers me, all of these things, I thought about the hurricanes that came up on us. You see, what really happened is the earth belched and it swallowed up all of that water and the steam. Hell hath enlarged herself. And it caused all of that destruction. And I think about an earthquake, a few months ago in Japan that swallowed up so many. But when it happened at sea, it swallowed up that water, and then it caused a great tidal waves and all that. But he said, and the heavens departed as a scroll when it is rolled together, and every mountain and island were moved out of their places. And the kings of the earth, and the great men, and the rich men, and the chief captains, and the mighty men, and every bondman, and every free man hid themselves in the dens and in the rocks of the mountains, and said to the mountains, fall on us, and hide us from the face of him that sitteth on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb. The lamb, the tenderness of the lamb we think of, the sacrifice of the lamb. But now instead of asking for salvation from him, the lamb has become the lion. And God is sending judgment. And I thought if I was asked to preach today, I'd preach from Isaiah chapter number 1. God said, look what a mess you're in. I've done all this, made these provisions for you, and you've rejected. And he tells us, but still, if you just come and reason with me. Now, that's not a conference that he's asking them to come to, where they would compromise, one give a little here and one give a little there. But it's dogmatic. Look what you've done now. He tells us about the judgment to come. But just say this, in 1964, I was very troubled, and my wife and I, we had 2 children already. One of my oldest child had already gotten saved, and my wife had been saved for some time and out of fellowship with God. And in February, they had a revival there at Roanoke Baptist Church, and she got right with God. And they had a young adult Sunday school class, and they had couples' names that they would pray for and get them in one at a time. And our name was on the list, and my wife had got in, and she, in February, they had a revival, and she went forward and promised the Lord she's going to live for God and get back in church whether I did or not. And of course, she put all those Christians up to pray for me. And the Sunday school teacher run a store over there on Liberty Highway. He was a godly man. And they started praying for me, and we had Pastor Craig Hughes and his wife was another couple they had on the list. But anyway, on May the 10th, 1964, I had previously started going with her some just to keep people from thinking I wasn't too mean to go to church. And you see, I had been raised by a Christian mother that went to church when she could, and sometimes walked and carried a big family. Didn't have but 11 children, but they had to be carried to church. And 2 boys and 9 girls. So I knew what I should do. And I didn't know it then, but I know it now. Down through the years, the Lord was dealing with me. I really like to go to church. I guess because there's a lot of people there. And that's why the young people would all go where the gathering was. We didn't have all the entertainment that folks have now. But anyway, I'd go with her to church. And then it got to where every time the preacher would preach, Sunday school teacher would get up and cry over me. And I didn't know then that he's crying over me, but he's up there crying, trying to teach. But I had a burden for Brother Craig and I and others. But on May the 10th, 1964, I decided to go to church with her. And I went to church, and I'd been under real deep conviction for 2 weeks. And I knew something had to give. But it was Mother's Day, 1964. The church was full of people. The preacher was long-winded. And he had preached, and when he got ready to dismiss, everybody's wanting to go home and eat dinner with Mom. Everybody but me. I reckon in all of that crowd, why didn't God speak to somebody else? But, of course, I wasn't worried about that then. I just knew he's dealing with me. But I was under conviction. I was holding my little girl in my arms. She was a baby then. And this big, heavy-set woman that was sitting right behind me, her and my wife were real good friends. She tried to take my baby away from me because she knew I needed to go forward. And I wouldn't turn my baby loose. And I was standing there just a boo-hooing, and the church full of people wanting to go home. And here I was, they must have sang 15 verses. But the Sunday school teacher came back there to me. Think of that. Sunday school teacher came to me, and then the preacher came. They ganged up on me. And so I said, no, not now. I was standing there just boo-hooing. And so they finally give up on me and left. And they started out and started down the aisle, and they didn't know it, but I was following them. So they came on down, and I fell in the altar, and asked the Lord to save me. Make a long story short, we went home, and I took my wife's Bible while she was fixing Sunday dinner and tried to find something to read. And I couldn't find where to stop. I kept thumbing to it from one to the next. But do you know they didn't send the visitation committee to make sure I come back that night? And to God be the glory. I hadn't missed any since then. I mean, I went to college right there. In fact, the Christian's supposed to be in church. I graduated. I'm a full believer in that. But, well, the Lord's been so wonderful. 2 weeks after that, I taught us, I think it was 2 weeks after that, I came forward that night again and surrendered my life to be used of God. I didn't say, Lord, I'm going to be a pastor. I didn't say I'm going to be a missionary. I said, Lord, here am I. If you can use me, you're great enough to save me. Now, if you can use me, here I am. And I got up and told the church that. I didn't know any better. I said, whatever I can be used for. And that Sunday school teacher came to me, put his arm around me and said, okay, son, now you asked for it. 2 weeks from now, I want you to teach the Sunday school class. What about that? Asking me to teach Sunday school class. Well, of course, I studied and studied on that. And so 2 weeks after that, some of my family came, and other that knew me had come to hear me teach Sunday school. And I got up there, and I talked for about 5 minutes and told them everything I knew. But, glory to God. But the Lord moved in, and that whole Sunday school class, we usually run around 25, 30 people in that class. And the whole Sunday school class was crying, and I just sat down and joined them. But I just want to tell you, I don't know how many years that's been. It's been 30-something, close to 40 years. Anyway, I'd go around and people would say, "You're not sure you're not called to preach?" And I kept putting off, wouldn't announce my call for about 1.5 years. I announced my call. I'd already been preaching all over the country up there. Wednesday night prayer meetings, I'd been preaching, but I hadn't announced my call. But I went up to see Brother E. Verdi Moore, first missionary, first live missionary I ever saw. But anyway, I was up there for a while, and God got on my heart, and I come back, and I was ready, Lord, whatever you want me to do. And so the Lord's used us in the ministry. Now, I didn't tell God what I wanted to do, but he used me to pastor 34 years without a break. I mean, not in and out, 34 years, 2 churches, and the Lord's sure been good. He allowed those churches to let me preach for 34 years. 10 years at First Church, and then 24 at the next. And it's wonderful. And if I could sing, I'd sing that song. To me, he is so wonderful. One of the things is God has allowed my wife and I to meet some of the most precious people all over this country. I'm so encouraged and thrilled about these young evangelists. Young people. You see, Dr. Sattler died, Billy Kelly died, Mays Jackson died, and I said, Lord, who's going to be left? And the Lord just showed me I filled in for some young pastors I mean, they just kids. But they're pastoring church now, and the Lord's let me fill in for them a time or two. So we thank the Lord for what He's doing. And I appreciate Pastor Joe Chapman. Appreciate Brother Hughes, my pastor. Now, can you believe he's my pastor? He wasn't even saved. Amen. And then evangelist Tom Hayes. We used to, every time we hear he's going to preach somewhere, and I had him at Glassy Mountain preach for me. I think one of the first meetings he run must have been there, but that was, I never will forget. That was so wonderful, a series of message he brought. Good to be back with you, brother. I didn't mean to take up that much time.